I had imagined my wedding day 100 different ways. In every version, I saw myself walking down the aisle, radiant and unshakable, my mother dabbing tears from her cheeks, my father standing tall despite the years that had weathered him. I imagined the scent of roses heavy in the air, the music swelling like a promise, and the sound of my own heart racing toward forever. And in truth, the day began just like that. The sunlight filtering through the cathedral windows bathed the guests in gold. The organ thundered the first notes of the march. I felt the weight of 100 eyes on me as I walked slowly down the aisle, veil brushing against silk, bouquet cradled in both hands. Karen was waiting, his smile calm, steady, exactly the kind of smile a woman could build a life around. I said I do with certainty. I said it with hope. I said it with every intention of locking away the stress and chaos of work, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety that had stalked me for months. For one day I promised myself I would be nothing but a bride, but life has a way of punishing promises. It happened in the vestibule, just as Karen and I were about to walk into the roar of applause outside the church doors. The petals were waiting, the cheers swelling when my phone buzzed in my hand. I should have ignored it. I should have tossed the device aside and lived in that perfect second of happiness. But curiosity is a poison. I glanced down at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. Fired, consider it my gift to you. No signature, but none was needed. The sender's name, glowing at the top, was Tate Lawson, my boss's son, my tormentor, the man whose arrogance had poisoned the last 3 months of my career. And he had chosen this moment, my wedding day, to cut me down. I froze, bouquet trembling in my grip. My vision blurred. The cheers of the guests blurred into meaningless sound. Karen leaned closer, concern flickering across his face, until I wordlessly held up the phone. He read the message, and then he smiled, not with amusement, not with cruelty, with something far quieter. Knowing, he lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, the way he always did when he wanted to calm me. "Check your messages later," he whispered. "Today belongs to us." I stared at him in disbelief. My career gone. My title as lead project manager, the role I had fought for, the system I had built with sleepless nights and endless determination, wiped away with 3 casual sentences from a man who had never earned a thing in his life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse, but Karen's eyes anchored me. He knew something. And so, against every instinct screaming inside me, I slipped the phone into my maid of honor's purse, took Karen's arm, and stepped into the sunlight as the church doors swung open. Rose petals rained down, cameras flashed, the crowd erupted, and I forced a smile onto my lips, the kind of smile that made people believe everything was perfect. 3 hours later, as the reception unfolded in glittering celebration, the storm returned. We were dancing, the lights low, the music soft. My maid of honor rushed across the floor, breathless, panic flickering in her eyes. She clutched my phone, screen glowing like a warning. "Waverly," she gasped. "Your phone won't stop buzzing. You have 108 missed calls." The world tilted again. I snatched the phone from her and scanned the screen. Calls from coworkers, calls from the office, and then 17 missed calls from one number that made my breath catch. Gregory Lawson, the founder of Crescent Design studio. My boss, Tate's father. The air seemed to thicken around me. My mind spun, colliding with questions. Why would Gregory be calling Emmy, the woman his son had just gleefully fired, again and again on my wedding day? What crisis could possibly justify this flood of desperate calls? I knew, deep in my chest, that this was no ordinary firing. No mere power play from a spoiled son. This was the opening move of something larger, something that would drag me far beyond the boundaries of that glittering reception hall. I excused myself, clutching the phone to my chest, heart hammering. I slipped into the bridal suite, the muffled music fading as I closed the door. The world outside celebrated. Inside, silence pressed close. I lifted the phone to my ear, replaying the voicemails one by one. "Waverly, this is Gregory. Call me immediately. Tate had no authority to terminate you. There's been a mistake. We need you." The second message came, sharper. "Waverly, please, it's urgent. The downtown project submission is due Monday. No one can access your system." Then a third, a fourth. Each message is more frantic than the last. By the 6th, Gregory's voice had cracked, stripped of its usual authority. "Waverly, please, the West Side team is threatening to walk. We can't find the updated renderings. Tate doesn't have the password. We are at a complete standstill." I lowered the phone, staring at the velvet carpet beneath my dress. My bouquet lay discarded on the table, forgot. For the first time since that text, I felt something unexpected. Not despair, not grief. Power. For 2 years, I had been the heart of Crescent Design studio. I had designed the very system that ran its projects, every blueprint revision, every budget, every approval. It had been my masterpiece, my secret language. And Tate, in his arrogance, had canceled the training sessions that would have allowed others to learn it. He thought he could make me irrelevant. Instead, he had made me indispensable. I was the only one who could navigate the labyrinth I had built. And now, on the day I should have been at my weakest, I held every single card. The door opened softly. Karen stepped inside, his expression gentle but unreadable. He sat beside me on the velvet sofa, careful not to wrinkle the layers of my gown. "I should tell you something," he said quietly. I turned to him, still clutching the phone like a weapon. His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. "The plans Tate has been submitting," he continued. "He's been altering them after the engineers sign off. Removing safety features, substituting cheaper materials, things that would never pass inspection, things that could get people killed." My blood ran cold. "That's not just unethical," I whispered. "That's criminal." Karen nodded once. "I've been documenting everything. I was going to report it next week." In that instant, I understood the smile he had given me at the altar, the calm that had baffled me. My firing wasn't just cruelty, it was an opportunity. Tate had severed me from the company, cutting away liability, while at the same time making Crescent helpless without me. "What should we do?" I asked, voice shaking. Karen took my hand. "Nothing, not today. Today we danced. Tomorrow we fly to Baez, and when we come back," he leaned close, his lips brushing my forehead, "we reshape everything." I looked at him then, really looked. The man I had just married was not just a husband, he was an ally. And together, we would make Tate regret every choice that had brought us here. That night, as I returned to the reception floor, I danced like a woman who had no weight on her shoulders, like a woman who had not just lost everything but gained a weapon far more dangerous than anger. By midnight, I had 212 missed calls, and as the clock struck 12, I made a silent vow. Tate Lawson thought he had destroyed me, but he had only freed me. And one day soon, he would learn the true meaning of gifts. People often assume that revenge begins with betrayal, that it sparks like a match in the moment someone wounds you, that rage alone is the fuel. But I know better. Revenge begins much earlier. It is built in layers, like the foundation of a skyscraper, long before anyone notices the steel rising into the sky. Mine began in childhood. My parents were teachers, the kind of people who believed in precision, in discipline, in earning every ounce of progress. My father taught mathematics at the local high school. My mother taught literature. Together, they shaped me into something neither of them had fully intended. A child who craved both structure and story, who measured the world in numbers but needed to understand the narrative behind them. When I was 18, during my first year at college, my father had a stroke. I remember the night clearly. I had been studying late architectural sketches spread across my dorm desk when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to my mother, breaking in ways I had never heard before. I nearly dropped out then. We could not afford the medical bills, and she could not shoulder the burden alone. But my father, weakened and speechless in his hospital bed, squeezed my hand once with surprising force. His eyes told me everything. "Don't quit. Don't let this stop you." So I doubled my course load. By day, I buried myself in architectural theory and urban planning. By night, I worked at a printing shop, churning out blueprints for firms I could only dream of joining. I learned the smell of ink, the feel of paper pressed with precision, the subtle satisfaction of flawless alignment. Every paycheck went toward bills, every hour of study carried me further from collapse. I graduated with honors, exhausted but unbroken. And when I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, I knew the fight had shaped me into something harder than steel. Crescent Design studio found me not long after. Gregory Lawson, the founder, interviewed me himself. He was a man in his late 50s then, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, a leader who had built his empire brick by brick. He asked me questions no one else had bothered with, about systems, about patterns, about whether I believed creativity and order could exist side by side. When I told him I had designed my own project management templates just to survive college, he smiled in a way I'll never forget. "You don't just want to build buildings," he said. "You want to build the process that makes buildings possible." I started as an assistant project manager. Within months, I was running teams. My mind worked differently from most. Where others saw endless spreadsheets and version numbers, I saw connections. I saw the threads that tied one decision to another, the domino effect of each change. So I created something new, a proprietary system that tracked every moving piece of a project, from blueprint revisions to client requests to permit applications. It was meticulous, ruthless even, but it worked. Deadlines shortened. Client satisfaction rose. Mistakes that used to cost weeks were caught in hours. Gregory praised me in meetings, called me the best investment this company ever made. For the first time in my life, I felt indispensable. And then Tate arrived. If Gregory was steel, Tate was glass, polished on the surface, fragile beneath. He was in his early 30s, handsome in a magazine cover way, with the same Lawson jawline but none of his father's discipline. He had drifted between departments, leaving behind trails of unfinished work and irritated colleagues, until Gregory, weary and readying for some retirement, announced Tate as director of our division. Overnight, everything changed. Meetings I once led were stripped from me. Ideas I had presented were repeated by Tate as if they were his own. Training sessions I scheduled were canceled as unnecessary expenses. He excluded me, undermined me, and when he couldn't erase my contributions, he claimed them. The office atmosphere grew thick with unease. My coworkers whispered sympathy but did little else. Everyone knew the danger of crossing the boss's son. I endured it at first. I told myself I could outlast him, that my work would speak louder than his games. But the constant friction wore me thin. It was during those months that I met Karen. I remember the first day clearly. I had been at the city permit office, frustrated, a stack of Crescent submissions in my arms. Most clerks rubber-stamped documents with barely a glance, but the man behind the counter that day took his time. He studied every line, every signature. His dark eyes moved with quiet precision, his pen tapping thoughtfully against the desk. "This foundation specification doesn't match the approved engineering report," he said, looking up at me. His tone wasn't accusatory, it was curious. I blinked. "You actually read these? Isn't that the point?" His smile was small, almost shy, but his words carried a weight that struck me. We talked for longer than we should have, surrounded by blueprints and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. He asked me about the projects, about my system, about how I kept track of so many details. And for the first time in months, I felt seen not as an obstacle, not as a threat, but as a partner in thought. Coffee followed. Then dinners. Then nights walking under city lights, discussing architecture and philosophy, and the strange ways bureaucracy both protected and strangled progress. Karen became my anchor in a storm I hadn't even admitted was drowning me. What I didn't know then was that he had already noticed something dangerous. He had seen patterns in Crescent submissions that troubled him, patterns tied directly to Tate. Changes slipped in after engineering approval. Safety measures were quietly removed, materials swapped for cheaper alternatives. It was subtle but damning. 2 months after our first date, Karen proposed. Some said it was reckless, too fast, but I understood. He wasn't a man who wasted time pretending not to know what he wanted. And I, exhausted from years of clawing my way forward, craved the stability he offered. We planned a small wedding quickly, partly because we didn't care for extravagance, partly because I sensed something shifting at Crescent. Tate's comments about restructuring had grown sharper, and whispers hinted that my role was in danger. I didn't imagine, not even in my darkest moments, that he would choose to strike on my wedding day. But perhaps I should have known. Tate's cruelty wasn't random. It was calculated. He had watched me rise, had felt me outshine him, and his ego could not endure it. That was the seed of his gift. A text designed not just to end my career, but to humiliate me at my most vulnerable moment. What Tate didn't realize was that all the foundations of my revenge had already been laid. My father's stroke, my endless work nights, my system, Gregory's praise, Tate's sabotage, Karen's vigilance, each piece had been brick upon brick, waiting for the day when the structure would finally rise. And that day was coming faster than anyone expected. Betrayal never arrives all at once. It slices you in small increments, shallow enough at first that you don't realize how much blood you've lost until you're weak on your feet. Tate had been cutting me for months before the final blow. I used to think of Crescent Design Studio as a second home. Its glass-walled offices glittered with creativity, sunlight spilling across drafting tables, the hum of collaboration filling the air. But once Tate became my supervisor, the light dimmed. He moved through the office like a shadow with teeth, smiling in front of clients and snapping at staff the moment doors closed. He had power, but not respect. And that, I think, enraged him most of all. The first time I caught him stealing credit for my work, I was stunned. A client meeting, one of our largest accounts, discussing design revisions that I had painstakingly integrated into the system. When the client praised the clarity of the new reports, Tate leaned back casually, smiled, and said, "I thought a more streamlined format would help. Glad it's working for you." My throat tightened. I looked to Gregory, hoping for correction, but he was distracted, scrolling through messages on his phone. No one spoke. No one defended me. Later, when I confronted Tate, his smirk was pure venom. "You should thank me," he said. "Your little system gets noticed because I put my name on it. Otherwise, you'd just be another faceless cog." The knife slid a little deeper. After that, he began excluding me from meetings altogether. Invitations mysteriously lost in email, my presence dismissed as unnecessary. My carefully structured training sessions, where I had planned to teach others how to use the system, were canceled with the stroke of his pen. "Too expensive," he said. "We don't need hand-holding, we need results." I remember sitting at my desk one evening, the office empty, my computer humming softly. The system I had built glowed on the screen before me, lines of data I could navigate in my sleep. And for the first time, I wondered if I had created my own prison. I had given Crescent the most powerful tool they had ever possessed, but in the hands of men like Tate, it could be turned against me. And yet, I still believed in loyalty, in hard work, in the idea that Gregory, the man who had hired me, would see through his son eventually. I was wrong. The breaking point came not at the office, but at home. I had been buried in revisions for the downtown revitalization project, an enormous contract worth millions, when Karen came home one evening, papers tucked beneath his arm. His expression was tight, controlled, but I knew him too well not to notice the storm behind his eyes. "Waverly," he said quietly, laying the papers on our kitchen table. "You need to see this." I slid the documents toward me, scanning the lines with practiced precision. My system tracked every revision, every approval, every alteration. And yet these pages were different, subtle changes that hadn't passed through my hands at all. Foundation thickness reduced, load-bearing walls altered, fire exits adjusted, cheap shortcuts, dangerous shortcuts. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "These aren't the versions I approved." Karen's jaw tightened. "I know. That's because Tate submitted them himself after the engineering team signed off. He slipped them through to my department as final." I stared at him, heart pounding. "But why would the city accept them?" His eyes darkened. "Because most clerks don't bother to read, they rubber stamp, but I do, and I've been tracking a pattern. He's been doing this for weeks, removing safety features, replacing approved materials with cheaper alternatives. If these buildings went up as planned, they'd be catastrophes waiting to happen." My stomach turned. I saw it then, so clearly, the headlines after a collapse, the lawsuits, the lives ruined. And Crescent's name would be stamped across every one of them. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because I needed proof," Karen said. "I've been collecting every altered submission, every discrepancy. I was going to report to him next week." I pressed my palms against the table, the wood cool beneath my skin. My mind spun. I thought of the way Tate had smirked when he fired me by text on my wedding day. I thought of Gregory's praise, his blind faith in his son. I thought of the system I had built, the system Tate had locked away from everyone else. At that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This wasn't just about my pride or my career. This was about power, about safety, about justice, though not the kind you find in a courtroom. "What should we do?" I asked, my voice quiet now. Karen reached across the table, taking my hands. His touch was steady, grounding me even as the fire inside me grew. "Nothing," he said. "Not yet. Tomorrow we leave for our honeymoon. We act as though nothing has happened. And when we come back," he paused, searching my eyes, "we decide how to burn him down." The words should have scared me. Instead, they steadied me. That night, as I lay awake beside my husband, I thought of knives. The way Tate had cut me in small increments, leaving me bleeding but not broken. And I thought of how sweet it would feel to turn the blade back on him, not recklessly, not in rage, but with precision. Slowly, methodically, in a way he would never see coming until it was too late. Because revenge, I realized, is not a hammer. It is a scalpel, and I had always been meticulous with my instruments. The morning after our wedding, the world should have been simple. Sunlight, champagne, the soft rustle of silk sheets. Instead, I woke to the steady vibration of my phone against the nightstand, the sound already familiar, already suffocating. I rolled over, groggy, still wrapped in lace-trimmed exhaustion. Karen slept beside me, his arm heavy over my waist, his breathing slow. For a moment, I considered silencing the device again, burying it in the bottom of my suitcase, letting it die a quiet death. But curiosity is a parasite. It digs under your skin until you cannot ignore it. I reached for the phone, the screen lighting up my face in the dim hotel room. 74 missed calls, 11 voicemails. I pressed play. "Waverly, this is Gregory. Please call me back immediately. Tate had no authority to fire you. You're still part of Crescent. I'll fix this. I just need you to answer. The next message was tighter, urgency bleeding through. Waverly, the downtown revitalization project submission is due Monday. No one can access your system. The files are locked. We are dead in the water. Then another, please, Waverly. The West Side development team is threatening to pull out. Clients are furious. Tate doesn't know what he's doing. His voice cracked. I need you. I set the phone down, the words echoing in my chest. I had dreamed of Gregory admitting those words once. Back when his praise had meant everything, back when I still believed in loyalty to Crescent. But hearing them now, after the text on my wedding day, after months of Tate's sabotage, felt different. They tasted like ashes. Karen stirred beside me. His eyes opened slowly, and he watched me in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "How many this time?" 74, I whispered. He reached over, plucked the phone from my hands, and shut it off with a single press. Not today, he said firmly. Not while we're here. We were in Baez, a coastal city that felt like another world. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus, the streets bright with colors that seemed painted fresh each morning. Vendors called out from open markets, children darted barefoot across cobblestones, and the sea stretched endless and blue beyond the horizon. It should have been paradise. It almost was. On our third day, we sat on the beach beneath an umbrella, sipping fresh coconut water. The sun was high, the waves rhythmic, my toes buried in the cool sand. My phone, stubbornly powered back on, buzzed again. Another voicemail. Waverly, Gregory's voice rasped, desperation eating at his tone. Triple your salary. Come back and I'll make you a partner. Just tell me what you want. Karen tilted his head, studying me. And I deleted the message without replying. 2 days later, another offer came, partial ownership of the firm, a share of Crescent itself. Again, I deleted it. Karen never questioned me. He never suggested I take the offers, never pointed out what most would, that Gregory was dangling wealth and prestige beyond anything I had imagined. He knew the truth before I had even fully articulated it to myself. This had never been about money. It was about respect. And once lost, respect cannot be bought back with zeros on a check. The silence we gave Crescent became its own kind of music. Every morning, my phone lit with new calls, new messages, new pleas, and every morning, I ignored them. Instead, Karen and I explored Baez as if nothing waited for us back home. We wandered through spice markets thick with the scent of cinnamon and cloves. We hiked cliffs where the ocean wind threatened to carry us away. At night, we dined in open courtyards lit by lanterns, our laughter mingling with the hum of foreign songs. But beneath it all, I felt the tension building. Each voicemail from Gregory was a tremor in the earth, a warning of the earthquake to come. I had left Crescent paralyzed, and I knew the damage was spreading with each passing day. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the water, Karen turned to me. You realize, he said, that every minute you stay silent, Tate is digging Crescent's grave deeper. Gregory offered you the world and you tossed it into the sea. I smiled faintly, sipping the last of my drink. He offered me chains. Golden ones maybe, but still chains. Karen studied me for a long moment, then nodded. So what do you want? I looked out at the horizon, the waves crashing steady as breath. What did I want? Revenge, justice, power, all of them perhaps, but more than that, I wanted freedom. The kind that came from never again bowing to a man like Tate or depending on the mercy of a man like Gregory. I want them to need me, I said slowly, and I want them to know they can't have me. Karen leaned back, satisfied. Then you already have your revenge. But I wasn't so sure. Silence was power, yes, but silence alone could not last forever. Eventually, I would need to step back into the game, not as their pawn, but as my own queen. For now, though, I let the sea swallow Gregory's messages. I let Tate flounder in the quicksand of his arrogance. I let Crescent rot without the heartbeat I had given it. And I danced barefoot on the sand, the waves cool against my ankles, my husband's hand steady in mine. It was calm before the storm. And I was content to let it build, knowing that when it broke, it would not be me who drowned. By the time our plane touched down back home, Crescent Design Studio was no longer the fortress I had left behind. From the outside, its glass facade still gleamed against the skyline, but I knew better. Cracks had begun to splinter through the foundation, invisible to anyone who wasn't watching closely. I had been watching. The morning after our return, I opened my tablet, logged into public records, and saw the signs. Delays filed with the city. Contractors complaining of missing blueprints. Clients requesting emergency meetings. Tate had spent weeks pretending he could navigate the system I had built, and now the whole world could see he was drowning. My phone rang within minutes of our arrival. Gregory's name flashed across the screen. For the first time since my wedding day, I answered. Waverly, he said, his voice ragged. Thank God, we're in crisis. The downtown project is stalled. Clients are walking. Please name your price. I let the silence stretch until I could feel his desperation like static on the line. Then I said, calm as still water, I'm no longer available for employment. I've started my own firm. For a moment, there was nothing. Then Gregory whispered, we'll hire your firm then. Whatever you're charging, we'll pay it. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. You'll have to get in line. Because I already had a client. The city planning department had been looking for a consultant who understood architecture from both sides, the firms that built and the government that approved. Karen had made the introductions, and the vacancy was still fresh. By the time our plane wheels hit the runway, I had drafted a proposal. By the end of the week, Precision Protocol Consulting was officially registered, with the city as its first client. I didn't just return to the game. I changed the rules. The first months were chaos and clarity in equal measure. I rented a modest office downtown, its walls still smelling of fresh paint, its desks bare. I hired 2 of my former colleagues, people Tate had sidelined, underestimated, or outright humiliated. They came to me hungry, carrying both skill and resentment, and I gave them purpose. Every day we worked to design new verification protocols for building submissions. The kind of protocols that would catch exactly the kind of fraud Tate had been attempting. It was grueling, endless detail layered upon detail, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I wasn't building someone else's empire. I was building mine. Meanwhile, Crescent staggered. The city launched an audit of recent submissions, triggered by my new systems. Violations surfaced like corpses rising in floodwater. Load-bearing walls thinned. Fire exits are misplaced. Materials swapped for ones that would never withstand inspection. And every discrepancy pointed back to Tate's desk. The investigation was swift, merciless. The downtown project was pulled from Crescent entirely and reassigned to a competing firm. Tate wasn't just stripped of his title, his professional license was suspended, pending review. The empire his father had built over 30 years lost millions in a matter of weeks. When I heard Gregory had suffered a minor heart attack from the stress, I felt complicated. Despite everything, I couldn't summon joy from that. Gregory had once been a mentor, a man who recognized my worth before anyone else did. But his blind devotion to his son had cost him his company, his health, and nearly the safety of an entire city. Still, I didn't slow down. The precision protocol grew faster than I could have imagined. Within 6 months, we had contracts with 3 municipalities, each eager to avoid the embarrassment Crescent had suffered. My staff doubled, then tripled. Reporters began to call me the woman who redefined architectural accountability. And through it all, Tate's name became synonymous with failure. Blacklisted. Shamed. A cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and classrooms alike. One evening, as Karen and I unpacked boxes in the small fixer-upper we had just bought, I paused by the window, staring at the skyline in the distance. Crescent's offices were just visible, their lights dimmer than I remembered. Karen wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Do you ever feel sorry for him?" he asked. I thought about it. The smirk on Tate's face when he texted me on my wedding day. The way he dismissed me, silenced me, stole from me. The reckless arrogance that could have cost lives. "No," I said finally, "not yet." Because pity, I knew, was a gift, and some gifts had to be earned. For now, I was content with the first strike, and it was only the beginning. Empires rarely crumble in silence. They groan, they shudder, they scream. Crescent's fall was no exception. I watched it from a distance, the way one might watch a great building collapse in slow motion. Each day brought a new headline, a new whisper in industry circles. Contractors abandoning projects. Clients filing lawsuits. Reporters circling like vultures around a carcass. And at the center of it all, Gregory Lawson. For 30 years, he had been the unshakable face of Crescent Design Studio, the man whose vision built towers that reshaped the city's skyline. But when the world finally saw the rot his son had hidden beneath the gleaming facade, Gregory bore the blame. Shareholders demanded answers. The board whispered mutiny. Rivals who had once envied him now watched gleefully as he stumbled. I knew he was calling me not just as a desperate employer, but as a man clawing for the last threads of dignity. He left voicemails late at night, his voice gravelly, stripped of command. "Waverly, I don't expect forgiveness. But the board God, they're ready to remove me. If you would just meet with me, if you would vouch for me." I didn't answer. Because every word reminded me of that wedding day text, glowing on my screen like an open wound. You're fired. Consider it my gift to you. And yet, I wasn't immune to irony. The man who had once called me the best investment his company had ever made was now begging me to save it. Rumors spread that Gregory had collapsed during a meeting, clutching his chest, and rushed to the hospital. He survived, but was weaker. For a brief moment, I almost pitied him. Not for losing Crescent, he had made that bed when he gave Tate power, but for realizing too late that his empire was built on sand. Still, pity was dangerous. Pity could soften the edge of revenge, so I buried it deep and focused on my own empire. The precision protocol was thriving. We had landed a contract with another municipality, this one larger than the first. I spent my days in conference rooms filled with maps, blueprints, and engineers who actually listened. At night, I returned home to Karen, our fixer-upper slowly transforming into a place of warmth and promise. Then the letter arrived. It was hand-delivered in a thick cream envelope, Gregory's name scripted in ink across the front. For a long time, I considered tearing it in half without opening it. But curiosity, that old parasite, won again. "Dear Waverly," it began, the handwriting precise, deliberate. "Some debts can never be repaid, but acknowledgement is the beginning of atonement. I failed you, I failed Crescent. I allowed my love for my son to blind me to his arrogance, and we all suffer for it now. Tate is no longer in management. He is under review, stripped of authority. Crescent has new leadership, new protocols. We are rebuilding from the ashes. I ask not for your return. I know that the bridge has burned. I ask only for your counsel, to ensure we never fail the public trust again. Whether you accept or decline, know that my respect for you has only grown. You were right to stand your ground, right to protect the public, right to demand better. With sincere regret and admiration, Gregory Lawson." I read it twice, then a third time, searching for manipulation between the lines. Was this the same man who once enabled Tate's every whim, or had the collapse truly broken him? When Karen came home that evening, I showed him the letter. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, reading in silence. "What do you think?" I asked. He set the letter down carefully. "The words are right, but words are cheap. What matters is whether his actions match." "Should I meet with him?" Karen studied with me. "What would be your purpose, closure, vindication, professional curiosity?" I hesitated. "All of those, and maybe to see if change is real." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you already know your answer." The next week I agreed to meet, not at my office, not on neutral ground, but at Crescent itself. Returning to that building felt like walking into the skeleton of a life I had buried. The receptionist was new, unfamiliar. "Miss Abrams, Mr. Lawson is waiting in the main conference room." As I walked the halls, I saw faces I didn't recognize, systems on screens that weren't mine. They had started over. Tried, at least. When I stepped into the conference room, Gregory was there. Older, thinner, stress etched into his features. And beside him, Tate. I froze. Tate didn't look up. His once arrogant posture was gone, replaced by something hunched, subdued. Gregory rose to greet me, his handshake firm but his eyes haunted. "Waverly," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." I sat, my gaze cutting to Tate, who still stared at the table as if it could save him. "I wanted you to hear it from him," Gregory said, voice heavy. "Tate has something to say." Tate finally lifted his eyes. Humility, real or performed, dimmed their usual gleam. "I owe you an apology. What I did was unprofessional, vindictive, dangerous. There's no excuse." The words sounded rehearsed, but the shame coloring his face felt genuine. I let the silence drag before answering. "Apology noted," I said coolly. "Neither acceptance nor rejection, just acknowledgement." Gregory cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents outlining new systems, safety protocols, revised leadership structures. At the bottom was a contract, offering me a substantial fee to review and strengthen their processes. "We don't ask you to return," Gregory said, "just to evaluate what we've rebuilt." And then Tate stood suddenly, leaving the room. He returned moments later with a smaller envelope, which he placed before me with trembling hands. Inside was a check, the exact amount of my wedding costs down to the last flower arrangement. "How did you?" "Your planner is my cousin's friend," Gregory admitted quietly. "I asked for the total. I wanted it to be precise." Tate spoke again, his voice unsteady. "Consider it the gift I claimed to give you that day. Only this time it's real." Anger surged through me. Did they think money could erase humiliation? That repayment could rebuild respect. Before I could speak, Tate placed a small USB drive beside the check. "And this, your system. Every password, every access point." We managed to recreate basic functions, but it never worked the way it did under you. It's yours to keep, to destroy, to do with as you choose. I stared at it, 2 years of my life condensed into plastic and metal. My creation, my prison, my weapon. And for the first time, I realized that revenge isn't always something you deliver with fire and ruin. Sometimes it arrives on its own, humbling those who once stood above you. I closed the folder and stood. I'll review your proposals, I said evenly. My fee is triple your initial offer, paid in advance. And Tate, if I agree, you will complete every training module I assign, no matter how tedious. You will learn every aspect of doing this the right way. Tate paled but nodded. Yes, I understand. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. And Gregory, the check is unnecessary. Seeing your son learn integrity will be a gift enough. Then I left, the USB drive in my pocket, their stunned silence echoing behind me. The king had fallen. The prince was humbled, and I was no longer their pawn. Revenge doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it creeps quietly, winding its way through systems and signatures until the trap snaps shut before anyone realizes the teeth are closing. That was how it happened with Crescent. When Precision Protocol launched its first round of verification protocols with the city, the changes were subtle. New software overlays, additional checkpoints, automated alerts designed to flag discrepancies. To most firms, it was an inconvenience, an extra form, another box to check. But to those who had built their houses on sand, it was a death sentence. Crescent was the first to bleed. The downtown revitalization project had already been reassigned to another firm, but the city demanded a full audit of all submissions from the past 6 months. I watched from the sidelines, pretending to be disinterested, though inside, every nerve hummed with anticipation. It began with a single red flag. A foundation specification in one of Tate's files that did not match the approved engineering report. Then another, a fire exit shifted 3 meters without approval. Then another, load-bearing walls inexplicably thinned. Each violation was small on its own, but together they painted a picture of recklessness so blatant it bordered on criminal. The city called an emergency meeting. Karen sat across the table from Tate, the documents spread between them like evidence in a courtroom. These changes were never approved, Karen said, his voice measured but firm. Tate shifted in his chair, sweat shining along his temples. They were optimizations, cost-saving measures. Perfectly safe. I almost laughed when Karen leaned forward, eyes dark, voice steady. I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between optimization and sabotage. This isn't cost-saving. This is corner-cutting, and people could have died. The board could no longer ignore what had been whispered for months. The audit results went public, and Crescent's reputation imploded overnight. Headlines blazed across the city. Crescent Design under investigation for safety violations. Lawson legacy in jeopardy. Blacklisted, the fall of Tate Lawson. Contractors abandoned the ship, unwilling to risk association. Clients pulled funding. Investors demanded refunds. The downtown project, Crescent's crown jewel, was not only stripped from their hands but permanently reassigned to a rival firm. And Tate, once so smug, so untouchable, was destroyed. His license was suspended pending review, his name blacklisted across the industry. Colleagues who once endured his arrogance now whispered his failures in boardrooms. Recruiters who might once have courted him slammed their doors shut. For years, he had walked through Crescent's halls like a prince in waiting. Now, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I should have felt elated. I should have danced in triumph, watching him collapse beneath the weight of his own arrogance. And for a moment, I did. But as the weeks passed, I felt something else too. A strange emptiness. Because destruction, as satisfying as it can be, is fleeting. Once the fire burns, all that's left is ash. And ash alone cannot sustain you. Gregory suffered most of all. His company, his empire, had been built on a reputation for integrity. Now that reputation lies in ruins. I heard whispers that he had begged the board for one last chance, that he had collapsed in the middle of a meeting, clutching his chest. He survived, but weaker, diminished. And me, I thrived. The Precision Protocol flourished in the chaos. Municipalities sought us out, eager to avoid the embarrassment Crescent had endured. My staff grew to 15 within months. We rented a larger office, our logo etched proudly into glass doors that opened into rooms filled with blueprints, data, and the low hum of purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving someone else's mistakes. I was building something new, something entirely mine. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of our fixer-upper, the city skyline glowing against the night, Karen joined me. He handed me a glass of wine, his gaze steady on the distant lights of Crescent's headquarters. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "if this is enough?" I followed his gaze, the building dark against the sky. "Enough what?" "Enough revenge, enough justice, enough to fill the hole they left in you." I took a sip, the wine sharp on my tongue. "It's not about filling the hole. It's about making sure they can never bury me in it again." Karen nodded, though his eyes lingered on me a little too long, as if searching for cracks in the armor I wore. Later that night, as I lay awake, I realized the truth. Tate's downfall was only the beginning. Revenge wasn't just about watching him suffer. It was about reshaping the world so he, and men like him, could never rise again. And that was a game I had only just begun to play. Revenge is rarely a single act. It is not one strike, one victory, one enemy brought to their knees. True revenge is a garden. It grows, it spreads, it blossoms in places you never expected until the very air you breathe carries its scent. That was the stage I had entered. Precision Protocol Consulting was no longer a fledgling company scrambling for recognition. In less than a year, we had become the gold standard for accountability. Cities that once rubber-stamped architectural submissions now turned to us for oversight. Developers, begrudgingly at first, paid our fees because they knew permits without our verification would not survive the city's new scrutiny. The press loved me. Articles called me the woman who redefined architecture and the watchdog who changed the rules. They painted me as a symbol of integrity, of female resilience in a male-dominated industry. I posed for photographs I never asked for, my image printed beside headlines that described me as both ruthless and visionary. Sometimes I barely recognized the woman in those pictures. Her eyes sharp, her jaw set, her smile a rare and calculated thing. She looked untouchable. And maybe she was. Yet beneath the surface, the work was exhausting. My office buzzed with constant activity, data analysts running checks, engineers cross-referencing plans, interns compiling reports. I hired aggressively, pulling in talent overlooked by larger firms, people hungry for a chance to prove themselves. Many had stories like mine, underestimated, dismissed, told they weren't enough. Under my roof, they thrived. Revenge, I realized, wasn't just about what I destroyed. It was about what I built. But not everyone celebrated my rise. With every contract we won, another firm lost ground. Rivals began to whisper that I was dangerous, that my methods were too strict, too unforgiving. They claimed I slowed projects with endless red tape, that I thrived not on building but on blocking. The loudest whispers came from a firm called Halden & Co., one of Crescent's oldest competitors. They had inherited the downtown revitalization project after Crescent collapsed, and for a while, they basked in the glow of their victory. But my systems caught them too, subtle bribes hidden in approvals, safety flaws buried in paperwork. The investigation hit the headlines within weeks. Halden's CEO, a man named Victor Halden, called me personally. "You've made yourself an enemy," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "Do you really think you can police an entire industry? Firms like mine built this city before you were even born." I leaned back in my chair, the skyline glittering through my office window. And those same firms nearly brought the city down with their shortcuts. "If that makes me your enemy, Victor, I'll wear the title proudly." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Careful, Miss Abrams. When you rise this fast, there are always people waiting to cut you down." He hung up and I stared at the phone for a long moment. His words weren't a threat, not exactly, more like a promise of resistance. It didn't scare me. It thrilled me, because power without enemies is nothing more than comfort. And I had never been interested in comfort. Still, the resistance grew. Anonymous articles began circulating, questioning my methods. Were my fees extortionate? Did I have conflicts of interest with city officials? Some accused me of sleeping my way into influence, a laughable but predictable attack. Karen stood by me through it all. At night, after long days of battles, he would pour me wine, run his hand along my back, and remind me of the simple truths. "You're not just succeeding," he would say. "You're rewriting the rules. Of course they're afraid. Of course they're lashing out. Fear is the sound an old world makes when it's dying." I clung to those words. They steadied me when the noise threatened to drown out the purpose. And yet, even as rivals circled, Crescent remained a ghost at the edge of my vision. Their name still carried weight, their fall still echoed in the industry. Gregory had gone quiet after our last meeting, retreating into the background, his health fragile. Tate had disappeared from headlines altogether, swallowed by shame. Sometimes I wondered if he watched me on the news, saw the empire I was building on the ashes of his cruelty. Did he regret that text? Did he ever wish he could take it back? But then I remembered the smirk on his face, the casual malice of his words, and I let the thought die. Because revenge had blossomed far beyond Tate Lawson. It was in every contract we won, every protocol adopted by cities across the region. It was in the interns who found their voices under my roof, in the engineers who no longer had to beg for their safety concerns to be heard. It was in the way Victor Halden's voice tightened when he realized his firm was next under scrutiny. Revenge had become my ecosystem, my oxygen, and I was nowhere near finished. Revenge tastes different depending on how it's served. Sometimes it's sharp and immediate, like steel against the tongue. Other times it's slow, smoky, lingering in the back of the throat long after the moment has passed. By the time Crescent collapsed, I thought I had tasted it all. The headlines had been satisfying, yes. The contracts flowing into precision protocol had been intoxicating. Watching Tate's name blacklisted across the industry had been a heady rush of justice, but none of it compared to the day I saw him fall in person. It happened at an industry hearing, one convened by the regulatory board to review Crescent's violations. Karen was scheduled to testify about the falsified documents Tate had submitted. My role was not official, but the board invited me to observe, given my firm's new protocols had exposed much of the fraud. The room was packed. Architects, engineers, reporters, all gathered in the sterile gray chamber, the weight of reputation pressing heavier than the steel beams our profession was built on. When Tate walked in, the murmurs began. Once he had strutted into such rooms with careless arrogance, a prince of privilege untouchable by ordinary consequence. Now he looked hollow. His tailored suit hung loose on his frame, his hair unkempt, his eyes sunken. He carried a folder clutched too tightly in his hands as if it were a shield against the storm. The board chair began the proceedings. One by one, documents were read aloud. Safety violations cataloged. Submissions altered. Lives potentially endangered. Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of his career. When Karen spoke, he did not look at me. He looked directly at Tate, his voice calm but merciless. These changes were not mistakes, Karen said. They were deliberate. A pattern designed to cut costs at the expense of public safety. If they had gone unnoticed, we would be speaking not about violations, but about lives lost. The silence afterward was suffocating. Tate's face drained of color. When asked to respond, he stammered, his usual charm evaporated. I thought they were harmless adjustments. I didn't realize. The chair cut him off. Mr. Lawson, these were not harmless. They were calculated, and the evidence shows you falsified approval signatures. Do you deny this? Tate's lips parted, but no words came. The murmurs swelled. Reporters scribbled furiously. I sat in the back row, watching it all unfold, my heart steady, my face unreadable. Inside, however, a deep, quiet satisfaction bloomed. This was the boy who had smirked as he ruined my wedding day. This was the man who thought power meant immunity. Now, stripped bare before his peers, he looked small, mortal. For the first time, I felt the personal taste of revenge. Not abstract, not professional, not hidden behind systems or headlines. Personal. After the session adjourned, I lingered near the exit. Tate passed within arm's reach, flanked by his attorney. Glanced up just once and our eyes met. There was no arrogance left, no smirk, just recognition and shame. He looked away quickly, but I held his image in my mind like a trophy. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is not what you say, it's what you no longer need to say. That evening at home, Karen found me sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, staring at the twilight. Was it enough? He asked softly. I thought of Tate's trembling hands, his ashen face, his silence in the chamber. I thought of Gregory's letter, waiting unopened on my desk, promising repentance, begging counsel. For today, I said, it was enough for today. But revenge is addictive. Once tasted, it lingers, and I knew tomorrow I would crave more, because Tate's humiliation was only one piece of the ashes. Gregory's reckoning still awaited. Gregory Lawson invited me back into Crescent's offices with the air of a man summoning a ghost. The company still stood, but the energy inside felt different. Softer. Humbled, the receptionist greeted me with deference, leading me to the main conference room where Gregory waited. His once commanding presence was diminished. Lines cut deeper into his face, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight. And then there was Tate. He sat quietly beside his father, dressed in a plain suit that looked borrowed rather than tailored. He did not meet my eyes. Once, he would have leaned back with a smirk, arms crossed, radiating entitlement. Now he kept his hands folded tightly, his posture shrinking him into the chair. Gregory rose as I entered. "Waverly," he said softly, "thank you for coming." I took my seat without responding. Let him speak. He pushed a folder toward me. "We've rebuilt everything from the ground up. New protocols, new leadership structures. We've done what we can to cleanse the rot." I flipped the pages. They were thorough, I had to admit. Safety redundancies, training requirements. Audits scheduled quarterly instead of annually. On paper, it looked impressive, but paper doesn't build trust. "And him?" I asked finally, tilting my chin toward Tate. Gregory's voice dropped. "He has something to say to you." Tate lifted his head slowly. His eyes met mine for the first time in months. They were not defiant, they were raw. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice hoarse. "What I did was unforgivable. I stole from you. I humiliated you. I put lives at risk because I wanted power I hadn't earned. I thought firing you would make me strong. Instead, it revealed how weak I was." The room fell silent. He waited, braced for my judgment. I leaned back, studying him. "Apologies are easy, change is not." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Then teach me." For a heartbeat, I almost laughed. The arrogance of Tate Lawson, asking me to be his teacher. But as the silence stretched, I saw something new flicker in his eyes, not manipulation, not performance, desperation. Gregory cleared his throat. "We want you to oversee his training, to ensure he never repeats his mistakes. Not as an employee, your independence remains, but as a consultant. Crescent will pay whatever you ask." I let the moment hang before answering. "My fee will be triple your offer," I said finally. "Paid in advance, and Tate will complete every training module I assign. No shortcuts, no excuses. He'll learn ethics, compliance, every tedious detail he once mocked. And if he fails even once, I walk." Gregory nodded instantly. "Agreed." Tate paled, but he didn't argue. He simply whispered, "I understand." I rose, gathering the folder. At the door, I paused. "You think redemption is about words. It's not. Redemption is about repetition, choosing the hard thing every single day until the choice becomes who you are." I looked at Tate one last time. "Welcome to your chains." Then I left, their silence following me down the hall. For the first time, revenge didn't feel like destruction. It felt like control. And perhaps that was the sharpest blade of all. The first morning of Tate's training, I arrived at Crescent earlier than expected. I wanted to see if he would be late. He was. He was already there, seated in the conference room with a binder open in front of him, pen poised like a schoolboy waiting for instruction. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't smirk. He didn't roll his eyes. He stood stiffly as though protocol itself had been carved into his posture overnight. "Good morning," he said, voice even. I didn't return the greeting. Instead, I dropped a thick packet on the table. Module 1, Fundamentals of Compliance. He blinked at the title. "But I already know." "Stop." My voice cut sharp. "You think you know, that arrogance is why we're here. You will start at the beginning, every form. Every regulation, every code. If you miss one detail, we start over." For a moment, old Tate flickered in his eyes, resentment, defiance, but it died quickly. He nodded once. "Understood." I sat across from him as he began. Page after page, his pen scratched across the paper, filling in definitions, tracing codes, answering questions so basic I knew his pride must have screamed. Yet he did not complain. By noon, his tie was loosened, his forehead damp with sweat. He passed the first assessment with 92%. Not bad, but not perfect. "Redo it," I said coldly, sliding the papers back. His jaw clenched, but again, no protest. He lowered his head and began again. That was the rhythm of his days. Study, write, repeat. In the afternoons, I shadowed him at project sites. Where once he had swaggered with half-knowledge, now he measured walls with trembling precision, cross-checking against approved plans, his clipboard filling with meticulous notes. Workers noticed. Some mocked him quietly, the prince is finally carrying his own bricks. Others nodded with respect. For the first time, Tate Lawson wasn't untouchable. He was accountable. Crescent, too, bent beneath the new weight of my demands. Their board bristled at my fees at the hours I forced their heir to spend on tasks beneath him, but Gregory silenced them. "If this is the price of survival," he said in one meeting, "then we pay it." And so Tate's chains tightened. At night, I thought of him. Not with sympathy, but with scrutiny. Was this humility real, or just another mask worn to appease me until the spotlight dimmed? I remembered the boy who had texted me on my wedding day, his cruelty casual, his victory cheap. Could that boy truly be gone? One evening, I tested him. I handed him a stack of flawed submissions, each riddled with errors deliberately planted by my team. I watched him sift through them, his brow furrowing as he caught each discrepancy. One by one, he flagged them, his notes detailed, his corrections precise. When he finished, he looked up. These would never pass your system. They shouldn't have passed anywhere. For a moment, I saw something different in his eyes, not desperation, not performance, but conviction. Still, I didn't praise him. Praise was a luxury he hadn't earned. Do it again, I said instead, my voice flat, and he did. Redemption, I realized, wasn't a single act, it was a grindstone. And Tate was either being sharpened or worn down to nothing. Time would tell which. The city called it the Northside Renewal, a project sprawling across dozens of blocks, a labyrinth of housing, parks, transit hubs, and commercial towers meant to breathe new life into a neglected district. It was the kind of project Crescent once commanded without question, the kind of project I used to dream of shaping when I worked beneath their roof. But the world had changed. This time, the contract came with a condition. All submissions must be verified through precision protocol, the city planner announced at the press conference. No exceptions, which meant Crescent couldn't move a single blueprint without passing it across my desk. When Gregory extended the invitation for a joint meeting, I almost declined. The idea of sitting at Crescent's table again, of signing my name beside theirs, felt like a step backward. But Karen was right when he said, "You can turn it into a stage, Waverly. Not just oversight dominion," so I went. The conference room was full when I arrived. Crescent's board members shifted in their seats, their expressions tight with resentment. They didn't want me there, but they needed me. And need, I knew, was the strongest leverage of all. Gregory opened the meeting with weary dignity. The Northside Renewal could restore Crescent's reputation. "We intend to prove that we've learned from our failures." I said nothing, simply pulled out my notebook and waited. Let them squirm, and squirm they did. Every schematic, every line item, every estimate Tate presented, I interrogated. "Where are your redundancy checks? Who signed off on these materials? Did you account for transit load during peak hours?" To his credit, Tate didn't flinch. He answered each question carefully, his notes meticulous. Once I caught his eyes flicking toward me, searching not for approval but for acknowledgement. I gave none. The alliance was fragile, tense. Precision Protocol's analysts worked late into the night cross-referencing Crescent's submissions. My team found flaws and Crescent corrected them, again and again. It was grueling, humiliating for their board, but necessary. Meanwhile, rivals circled. Halden and Co. leaked to the press that Crescent had no right to touch such a project, not after their scandals. Another firm hinted that the Precision Protocol had become too powerful, questioning whether I was strangling the industry rather than saving it. The city ignored them for now, but the scrutiny was heavier than ever. And then came Tate's test. During a late-night review, one of my analysts discovered a discrepancy in Crescent's materials list. Cheaper steel substituted for the approved grade. It was the kind of cut corner Tate would once have defended with a smirk. I called him into the office at dawn. "Explain this," I said, sliding the document across the table. He studied it, frowning. "This isn't mine. Your signature is here. I didn't sign this." His jaw tightened. "Someone forged it." I watched him carefully, searching for the old arrogance, the old lies. Instead, I saw something sharper, anger, not at me but at the betrayal hidden in the pages. "Who?" I pressed. He exhaled slowly. "One of the senior board members, maybe. They've been fighting me since the training began. They think the old ways were good enough." For the first time, I believed him. "Prove it," I said, and he did. Within hours, Tate traced the forgery to a project manager loyal to the board's old guard. He presented the evidence at Crescent's internal review, his voice steady, his case airtight. The board sat in stunned silence as Gregory dismissed the man on the spot. When Tate walked out of the room, he caught my gaze. For the briefest second, I gave him a nod. Not approval, not forgiveness, just recognition that for once he had chosen the hard path. The uneasy alliance held. Crescent kept building. The Precision Protocol kept watching. And the city kept waiting to see if we would succeed or collapse under the weight of our own history. For the first time, I wondered if revenge could transform into something else. Not forgiveness. Never that. But perhaps redemption. Revenge may topple a man, but rebuilding an empire exposes fault lines you never knew existed. By the third month of the Northside Renewal, the cracks began to show. At first, they were whispers. Delays in material shipments. Permits mysteriously stalled at city offices. Anonymous complaints about unethical practices filed against Precision Protocol. I'd seen this pattern before, sabotage carefully orchestrated. Rivals circling, their knives hidden behind smiles. Halden and Co. led the charge. They had lost too much ground to me, and they wanted blood. A reporter leaked an internal memo accusing Precision Protocol of collusion with Crescent, claiming I had built the system only to sell the cure. The watchdog who feeds on the wounds she exposes, one headline sneered. The board at Crescent seized on it like vultures. This is exactly why we shouldn't tie ourselves to her, one senior member snapped in a meeting. She's turned us into her prisoners. The city will never trust Crescent again if they think we're her puppet. Gregory silenced them, but his authority was fraying. His health kept him out of meetings more often, his voice weaker when present. The old guard smelled opportunity. And Tate, poor, battered Tate, stood in the crossfire. I watched him at one tense board session, his jaw set as accusations flew. He didn't defend me. He didn't attack me. He did something I didn't expect. He defended the work. Our submissions are flawless, he said, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard. For the first time in years, Crescent is bulletproof. Do you want to throw that away because your pride is bruised, because you can't stomach being held accountable? The room fell silent. I studied him, wondering if this was still a performance. But no, the steel in his voice was real. He wasn't defending me. He was defending the integrity he'd been forced to learn. Still, the sabotage escalated. One morning, my office received a package. Inside was a flash drive with stolen Crescent documents, files edited to make it appear as though my firm had approved faulty blueprints. It was crude forgery, but dangerous enough. Had it reached the press, my credibility could have shattered overnight. Karen found me at my desk that evening, the fake documents spread before me, his brow furrowed. They're trying to pin their rot on you. Of course they are, I said coolly. When you become the standard, they don't just fight your work, they fight you. What are you going to do? I looked out the window, the city lights stretching endless against the night. Turn the trap on them. They think they're clever. They don't realize I built this system to catch liars. And I did. Within days, we traced the metadata back to Halden and COA junior associate clumsy enough to leave a digital trail. When I presented the evidence to the city, their investigation shifted like a flood breaking a dam. But though the rival attack failed, the board at Crescent grew restless. They wanted Gregory gone, Tate muzzled, and me out of their halls. The irony wasn't lost on me. Once, Crescent had fired me with a single cruel text. Now, the same board fought to push me away even as they relied on the system I created to keep them alive. At night, I lay awake beside Karen, the question gnawing at me, was I still seeking revenge or had I become a leader trapped by my own need for control? The cracks were widening in Crescent in the project in me, and I knew one truth with sharp certainty. Something would give, and when it did, the collapse would not be quiet. The end of Gregory Lawson's reign did not come with dignity. It came with whispers in corridors, with folded notes passed between board members, with quiet phone calls made in shadowed hours. For months, the old guard had simmered beneath his authority, waiting for the moment he faltered. When his health forced him to miss 3 consecutive strategy sessions, they struck. The announcement came on a rain-soaked Tuesday. Crescent's board issued a press release declaring Gregory Lawson was stepping down for health reasons and that an interim leadership committee would take over until new elections. It was a lie, of course. Everyone knew it. Gregory had not stepped down, he had been pushed. I visited him that evening at his townhouse. The once commanding man sat in an armchair by the fire, a blanket around his shoulders, his complexion gray beneath the flicker of flame. His eyes lit up faintly when he saw me. "They've taken it from me," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "My life's work, they tore it from my hands like thieves." I said nothing at first, because part of me thought, now you know how it feels. But another part of me, quieter, older, remembered the man who had once believed in me, who had written me that letter of remorse, who had begged for a chance to rebuild. "You gave them the opening," I said finally. "By letting rot spread under your roof, by protecting Tate until it was too late." He winced, but he didn't deny it. Instead, his eyes watered. "Will you watch over him, my son, even if Crescent falls?" I wanted to spit out no. I wanted to remind him that Tate had humiliated me, ruined me, but the words lodged in my throat. Because Tate, broken, chained, humbled, was not the same man he had been. "I'll watch," I said, my tone colder than my promise. Gregory closed his eyes, relief softening his features. Then maybe all is not lost. The next week, the board wasted no time reshaping Crescent. They cut costs, slashed teams, and quietly distanced themselves from precision protocol. At meetings, they began questioning my authority openly. "Your oversight is slowing us down," one board member sneered. "If this continues, the city will strip the project entirely." I stared at him. "If you cut corners again, the city won't strip the project. They'll bury it, along with every name on this board." The tension thickened. They wanted me gone, they wanted Tate gone. But the city still trusted my systems, and without them, Crescent would collapse entirely. That balance, precarious, fragile, was my shield, but shields can break. Meanwhile, Tate surprised me. With Gregory sidelined, I expected him to crumble. Instead, he rose, quietly but steadily. He took meetings the board avoided, fielded questions from regulators, defended the protocols he once mocked. Each time, his voice was steadier, his resolve harder. One evening after a brutal session, he approached me outside Crescent's offices. The rain slicked his hair to his forehead, his suit clinging to his frame. "They want you gone," he said simply. "And if they push you out, the system dies." I narrowed my eyes. "And what do you suggest?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "We fight them together." For a long moment, I searched his face, looking for deceit. But all I saw was exhaustion and a spark of something unfamiliar: conviction. The irony was staggering. The man who had once betrayed me at my weakest now asked for alliance. And worse, I was tempted. Because Gregory had toppled. The board had sharpened their knives. And for the first time, I realized revenge had carried me this far, but if I wasn't careful, it might cost me everything.